A one-way door are things that you go through is you can't go back. You close on that property, you can't unclose on that property if something goes wrong. And so you have kids, like, there's not going back. Yeah, I don't like it. I have 3 kids. I love my kids. I'll have as many kids as my wife lets me, but it's also, you're on the other side of this. And so and the two-way door is you get an opportunity to go through it. Check to see what's on the other side. If you don't like what's on the other side, you can just go back out to that.
Jake, welcome to the show today.
Michael Blank, how are you, sir?
So you got your butt kicked in a recession a little bit. Talk to us about that. What happened?
So yeah, I like to start with that story as far as I was sitting on a street corner down in Tucson. I was crying. I was actually praying. I was like, "Dear Lord, can I be worth nothing?" And so what that was is that I was fixing up this Adobe house, and at that point, I was just so crushed, emotionally crushed and crying, like literally physically crying. I had been broken as a person. And that house, that Adobe house that I was doing work on, was the result of me having a goal of being a millionaire before 30. So I achieved that. I became a millionaire before 30.
How'd you do that?
Through real estate, through flipping houses, through doing, a process up, building a little portfolio of having some rental properties. And then subsequently the market going down. The girl I thought I was gonna marry, we'd broken up. My brothers, who had been living and working with me and helping me out, said I was an asshole. The whole aspect of my life was kind of falling apart. I was 75 pounds overweight. And so when I see that in that moment, in that time in which I was sitting on that street corner, I'll give you even to rub salt in the wound, is I had a portfolio of properties that were worth less than I owed on them because the market had gone down in that recession kind of time period. The girl, even though we'd broken up, she felt bad for me. And even though I was hemorrhaging money, I'd come in with $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 to buy out of these mortgages of these properties that were declining in value. And I ran out of money before I ran out of properties. So I'm left, I have no money left. I'm just trying to figure out, how do I pay these bills in month out. The girl told the new boyfriend that she had that she could hire me as he could hire me as a contractor. So I'm doing this house remodel for the new boyfriend of the girl I thought I was going to marry. And I get to see every day, because he doesn't know our previous relationship. And so every time they come to the house to do a walkthrough, to update, to do the other things, it's my heart. And this is my first kind of real heartbreak kind of moment in my life, in my 20s. And it's just absolutely eating me up. And I'm putting myself in that situation because I'm so hard up for money that I need to figure out how to do things. And that's when I was like kind of broken, sitting on that street corner going, "Dear Lord, can I be worth nothing?"
It's better than negative.
Yeah, better than negative. Nothing. Zero would be awesome. Can I start over at zero? And that's kind of where, although my journey does not start at that point, I feel like it really became a defining moment of my life. Was I had to go bounce around the bottom, and trial and error is an amazing teacher, but is actually the least effective as far as way to learn. Wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, that's ideal. I mean, I was like you. I had apparently, I had to work, I had to make my own mistakes to a large degree instead of learning from other people. What were some you said was a defining moment? How did that experience change you?
So when I sat down there, like I said, I was bankrupt in every aspect of my life. And least importantly was money. Relationship, overweight, wasn't living, doing bucket list adventures, not doing, these things. And so what I did was, that rock bottom allowed me to foundationally and incrementally start building up. And I mentioned it earlier, that goals are great for one-time success. Systems are for those that want repeatable and predictable success. And so what I failed at was not having any systems. I just had a goal of becoming a millionaire before 30. And once I achieved that, I kind of didn't do much else. And so it was like, oh, how do I actually start developing some systems? And so that rock bottom allowed me to look at the things that I did well, the things that I didn't do well at, and then start building. And it's been a journey. I mean, this has been, decade, plus, since the subprime meltdown of '08, so another key book during that time period was Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week. Was so foundational to, and it's not, and you guys have, likely read it, and a lot of your reader or your listeners have likely read it. It's not about working a 4 hour work week. It's how do you 10x what you're doing? And so that was the foundational knowledge that I then took from that next rock bottom and started systematically. And I went back to school and got a master's degree in international real estate and finance. I started I became part of, the Go Abundance, how a group of people that were just doing bigger and better things. And it was like, man, I didn't know what I didn't know. And that was, at least that reset was that component for me to start building the foundation of the next iteration of my life.
So you kind of started over almost, you get a hard reset with some wisdom and some scars behind you. So what did your second half look like?
Yeah, I like that as a good explanation, a hard reset. But it was now figuring out, I'd had a little bit of knowledge base of what I wanted to do in the future. And so that allowed me to start systematically. Obviously, '09, the market was in free fall. I started flipping. Well, it used to be, they call them family offices now, but it used to be a rich guy. It was a rich guy that had a bunch of money. And so I was willing to go be the resources in the trenches. And so we put together and we started flipping a lot of properties. And I ultimately did, 1,300 flips in 23 states. We aggregated them and put them into single family rental portfolios. We sold them off to institutional investors. But at the end of the day, doing all of those transactions added a lot of skill sets to me. But it was at the end of it, we made all this money for all these other people, and we sat down and we're like, we don't have real estate. I was actually at dinner with Ken McElroy a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, he did the same thing in the '90s with condos. He bought apartments, condoized them, did thousands of these transactions, made lots of money in that time period, and then at the end of the day had no assets. And so for me, it's been an evolution of my own journey. While I did make a lot of money in transactions during that time period, it was like, how do we get real wealth? And that is really from the passive income and creating and investing into things, and things like that, what you guys are doing, investing into multifamily or commercial assets that you're owning for a long term. And so that is, even in my evolution of that 2.0 version, was creating momentum of cash, on a hamster wheel that then is now graduated into putting into more apartments and office buildings and commercial buildings and other things to start producing the cash flow of passive income.
I mean, there's a case for both, right? One is kind of the cash generation, which is the house flipping. And then there's the actual cash flow and wealth generation engine. And there was a guy I interviewed a little while ago who was basically flipping apartments in LA. So he would go and gut these, and a 12 unit would make $1 million because the cap rates are so low. And he would take the $1 million and buy a strip center in Texas, that served Latino. That was his entire strategy. He had 2 companies. As long as you realize that what they're each doing, right? Because I flipped not nearly as many as you did, but I flipped 3 dozen houses and make great money. But there was nothing passive about flipping houses, as you know. And so you were starting to see the kind of the insanity of it, but you were doing kind of this, you were doing it at the same time, and then you shifted into commercial property. What did you start doing then? How did you start investing in commercial?
Really, it was, at first I thought I was not smart enough to be able to do these bigger deals. I didn't, because I just knew I didn't really know anybody else doing those. Even from the fact that, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I hung out, during some of those times of the subprime, but I just didn't know anybody that was doing commercial deals. And it wasn't, and I feel, fortunate or blessed that now there's a lot of people that I do know doing this. There's a lot of people that now offer education programs. Part of the reason I went back to school was because I didn't even really know, like, how did I build out a pro forma? How did I get into some of those deals? What are those toggles that you can do to extract and add additional value? And it was a lot of self-doubt mindset, overwhelm of just not knowing which way to go. And so I was able to start sequencing and putting things together. I worked for a commercial construction company. The reason I worked for a commercial construction company was, I was able to find out what things cost. So that construction based knowledge is now I knew what things cost. I knew what some of these and what that extrapolated in a pro forma to kind of moving forward. And, really, it had to be that belief in myself that I could do this. And initially it was those houses that I thought the $100,000 or $200,000 house was safe. And what I, subsequently, and maybe it's just the benefit of hindsight in doing this, is I wish I would have done it earlier. I wish I've done bigger deals sooner. And, again, that is, I got into syndicating, putting together deals, getting collectively the vision of here's where this building, we can go buy it and we can fix it up and do a value added proposition. And that's what's been over the last 7 years is layering that benefit. I use a lot of data aggregation, and we started investing into Texas heavy. I wish I would have bought a lot more in Austin. We have an apartment that's just being finished, being built right now. So we did some development, again, from my background of construction. That made sense to me. And so we're just finishing up an apartment building. We'll be 12, 13 million into it. It's probably going to be worth 23.
So I love that. And one of the things that I just thought about was you're like, we went into Texas, we went heavy, and there is an inherent benefit from going deep into a market versus trying to pick properties all over, which I've done both. My first business, I was in 10 markets with 3,400 apartments, and we had some success, but we had some failures too. And I think a lot of that was inherently just, I didn't really know, I didn't go deep in a specific market, and because I didn't think that there was enough inventory. And you need a combination of inventory and, and then deal flow, and then and a rising economy as well to make things work. But I'm just curious, how important has that been to you as far as, understanding your market, and maybe talk about how you use that to your advantage?
I think location is very, very important. The depth of your knowledge of the market is, can be beneficial or negative. There's a lot of markets that are changing over. And when I say that is core markets or primary, secondary, tertiary. Each one of them has different pros and cons related to them. And the actual definition of what is a secondary market or tertiary market is somewhat ambiguous, and people define it in different ways. But what I look at is, I call this like the mafia rule. Is there's typically in secondary and tertiary markets, there's 5 groups or 5 families that essentially own like 80 or 90% of all the real estate in those markets. And then what you have is you have the ability to come in and find opportunity in existing markets that those 5 families don't do, or their legacy knowledge is, and when I'll give you an example of this, is like, you come in and buy an apartment building for $10 million. They go, I can't believe someone's paying $10 million for that apartment building. I owned it and I sold it for 1.5 million. Like, to them, that seems like such a crazy, because they're so close to it that they're like, I can't understand how it is. But you look at that as like, that's a 200 unit apartment complex for $10 million, where you're like 50 a door. At $50 a square foot all day long. Obviously, that's changed a little bit in multifamily, as every Tom, Dick, and Harry is chasing down a multifamily deal. And so there's no golden, secret markets that exist that aren't having people come in. But that's what I mean about the depth of market knowledge. And then I would map out where those investors are investing into. Some of them don't do apartments.
I think that, then there's the phenomenon where you actually become one of the 5 place, or you think you do when you're in the market and you're like, man, I just like we got in Huntsville like right before it just took off. And now every deal is like tripled where you were. And then, you start to like evolve into other areas of the market. But I think for us, it's been such a picking one and just knowing it really in a block by block basis and understanding kind of, I love getting real granular on the economics of what's coming, like where these new employers are coming in and trying to predict how that's going to affect the sites and things like that. So I'm sure you've done a bit of that as well.
Yeah, I would say, as far as, you're correct that having that micro niche detailed knowledge is beneficial and you can extract a little additional value. Blackstone was a perfect example of being macro correct, where I was micro correct, and I could get down and I could save you, 10 cents a linear foot on baseboards. And we did it in these markets, and we sold these properties to them at a premium of what today's pricing was. They were making a macro bet on the economy as a whole, and that the whole entire industry and all asset prices were going to go up. And so they were, making a $10 billion bet, and then they doubled their money. And so they made $10 billion profit. I was micro correct, and I made, hundreds of thousands or into the millions of dollars. So it depends on the capacity of what you can play. And that's why I say I wish I got a big, or bigger sooner, was because you can now start making those bigger bets that you can be. And if you're convinced on your investment thesis overall. And that's where I talk about, even in the book, is defining what is your investment thesis and your plan. Some people, it's just cash flow. I want to buy this and flip out of it in 12 months. Well, that's going to be a different, lens in which you're going to look at to investment criteria versus I'm going to buy this and own it forever, or 50 years or 10 years or 5 years. You're going to look and structure your deal differently. And then the different demographics of that market are going to have different benefits to you versus Amazon announcing a new facility, or, Google coming in, X, Y, and Z. And so the frenzy enough, and all of those have different dynamics at play, and then have teeter-tottering effects to then, you evaluating your deal. I like playing in front of the institutional investors. And when I say that, is just a little bit ahead, where I think there's enough evidence that I can understand that where a market is moving from but the institutional, private equity groups, they need like 10 comp sets of them to then say, okay, now I can justify this. I only need one or two. I'm going to go do that hard work before they get there, go assemble them, and then I can sell them off with a pretty picture and a bow on it at a 4 cap or 5 or whatever your market cap rate is.
You mentioned your book. I love the title, Catching Knives. That's the title of your book. It's a guide to investing in distressed commercial real estate. Why did you write that book, Jake?
I wrote it during the pandemic in 2020.
Of course. That's
I was like, this is it. This is the time. Jake has a lot of skills about buying distressed assets. This is going to be amazing. It's my time. And then all the real estate values tripled. So the government went and printed a lot of money, and maybe they kicked the can down the road to when the need for buying distressed assets is more valuable. But the core principles of the book are about how do you make an investment into commercial real estate and systematically build out your structure. Oftentimes you're doing research on a property or a market before the opportunities present themselves. You're assembling your team. And here's the other thing. The more that I've done real estate, now 20 years as a professional investor, the less I realize I know. I'm like, there's so much information that's available out there. It's assembling a team and getting a lot of experts. I don't practice real estate law, but I have real estate attorneys. I'm not a building engineer expert. I've seen lots of buildings, but there's guys that know that mechanical system way better than I do, assembling and putting together that team. And so that's why the process of how you can buy distress is you're going to have limited amounts of information. Sometimes you're going to have to do the work and homework ahead of time. So when that opportunity does present itself, you're ready to strike. And specifically around the commercial real estate world is you may only have an opportunity once a generation. with a single family house, when you're making a thing, that tower, that office building downtown, it traded last time when the RTC days, when the REITs fail and Sam Zell was, outbidding, people, and it hasn't traded in 30 years since then. And so when that happens and you're like, I really want to invest into this market, you may need to be prepared, and it may only be a small window of time. And so that's what you have to do, and be prepared to take this calculated risk.
It sounds like you're looking for a recession and you didn't get it during COVID. Like, what's your outlook now? Because it sounds like you want the world to be ready to strike when the iron is hot.
We're actually leaning more into hospitality right now. I think there's an opportunity in an environment when there's so low yield on many of the, trophy asset, classes, industrial, multifamily and others. There's very limited amounts of return, and especially in a rate, increasing in interest rate increasing environment. And so we're going in and we're leaning into the hospitality space, roadside motels and hotels, where we can go buy them at 8, 10, 12 caps. We can revamp them, get rid of the franchise flag. And then we're doing, and actually I've been helping a lot of people get in doing due diligence on other types of commercial deals on some of these secondary and tertiary markets, that this is the first time they've ever seen appreciation or rent growth ever, and when you're looking at Ohio, in an industrial building, this is the first time they've seen rent growth, and so what does that look like? How do you start underwriting that? How do you look into the due diligence? And so that's why I go back to that point of the calculated risk. Is rule number one is don't lose money. Rule number two is see rule number one. You don't want to go backwards. Mailbox money is fantastic, but not at the risk of losing your mailbox.
Yeah, due diligence is so important, and I know you talk about it a lot. Why is that so important? Number one, I mean, the obvious question is you don't want to buy wrong, you don't want to make a mistake, and so maybe to talk about why is what are some of the mistakes that you see people make, when they're pursuing multifamily or commercial property, and what are some of the things that you want to make sure the audience takes away from doing due diligence?
I think it's a very big question. I use a checklist, and I actually, have walked people through this as a course kind of thing, as like a checklist. Why do I use a checklist? The same reason a pilot uses a checklist, the same reason that a surgeon uses a checklist, is the downside risk is so significant. On a plane or surgery, someone might die, or you might crash into the side of a mountain or something like that. I'm not saying you're going to die buying an apartment building or buying an industrial center, but you may actually be like me, crying on the side of the road, wishing to be worth nothing. And so when I look at that, is I go and I systemize these things, is looking at all of the potential items, and especially while you're in escrow, when you control a property, what your goal is to eliminate all of these things that are risk to your deal. And I find that so many people just jump into deals because they hear that's what they should be doing, that they don't check all of the boxes. And then when they close, they hope that nothing goes wrong. There's components specifically around like environmental. There's things that you can do, and there's properties that I know of. And here's one of the interesting components is if you buy something that's contaminated, a dry cleaner, a gas station, or previously it was a dry cleaner, a gas station, or neighboring property contaminated, you buy it, guess what? The owner of that is now on the hook to do the cleanup. Not the previous owners. The person that owns it right now is responsible, and you may be into a multi-million-dollar environmental cleanup that takes you 10 years. And so there's some property that you could give me for free, $0, that would cost me millions of dollars. And so when I look at that, is like, why would you go down this checklist of like, did you get a phase one done? If there was a phase one, and there was something coming up, did you get a phase two? Did you check on those? Because that may prevent you from selling or financing that property in the future. And you're like, well, I got seller financing, or I got a really good deal. It's half of what it sold for before. The environment can change as people and cities and municipalities are now pushing for more sustainable, and the access that they have as information is all of these things are coming more to the surface. And also specifically around industrial buildings, you have no idea what they buried under there previously. And that's why you need to go through these systems, because the downside is you get completely wiped out.
I love this topic in general because I've seen people, I've known people that have gone into a deal and they just didn't understand the full scope of the construction that exists on whatever they're buying. And they get screwed because they go in with too light of CapEx, and they don't understand what they're getting into. So I'm curious, one of the tougher things to diagnose and to figure out is plumbing on older properties or whatever. And how do you kind of go into that part of your due diligence to figure it out? It's kind of an unknown often. You can scope lines, you can do this or that, but there could be an unlimited amount of issues there. And then, heating and air too.
I've actually done some destructive inspections. Like, we cut open walls.
I was wondering about that because you actually go in and cut into walls.
Yeah. Well, we've talked to the sellers and say, hey, asbestos or lead pipe or, all these other things could be very significant challenges to us. So we'll cut open the wall, we'll fix it, we'll repaint it, we'll do these other things. We've removed windows on historic buildings that we needed to get through. We're going to go dig holes to test out the, dirt and the contamination due to soil conditions. And so part of this is like, and here's the big thing that a lot of people don't understand is commercial is buyer beware. Is because there's a lot of disclosures around residential real estate. Commercial, it is like they just assume you know what's going on. And if you buy something, here's one of the other big components is, in a lot of commercial real estate, you're buying the cash flow that is producing. You're not, the building or the structure and industrial, but the finances of the tenant, especially on like a strip center you talked about, or industrial center or a manufacturing facility, the financials of that tenant are more important than the actual physical asset that are more important. And so how long? And so they're like, oh, the tenant's been there for 18 years. They only have 2 years left on the lease. Of course they're going to stay, but did you actually do due diligence? And why is that seller now selling? This 10 cap, building with 2 years left on the lease. And so my always the spidey sense or the tinglies on the back of my neck is like, what do I not know? This person has passively been investing into this. They're just cashing these checks for years over after years. And now they're like, you know what? It's just too easy. I don't want to continue to cash these checks. Let me get out and give it to some guy from Georgia or California or wherever else.
I think we talked about the importance of due diligence and having systems and checklists. And I think that's super important because, a lot of buyers, they are cutting corners. They're very eager to do a deal and they really don't want to know what's going on. And like you said, they hope that it doesn't happen. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But on the flip side of that is if you're too thorough and you're too careful, you never end up doing a deal. I have said in my experience that very rarely is there a no-brainer. Like, very rarely is like, my gosh, yeah, there's no way I can screw this up. There's always something that bothers me about a deal. There's always some risk, something I don't like, something I need to somehow mitigate. And if I don't, then I'm never doing a deal, right? So I want to see what your feedback is on, yes, due diligence, but let's say you discover something that you don't like. Does that mean that you automatically walk from the deal? Does that mean you try to, in other words, what's your mindset like to basically accept risk, mitigate it, and still do deals while still following your checklist?
I think that's a great question as far as, analysis paralysis. I've heard that. I've had lots of investors come to me and just be like, they freak out. They have a fear of that unknown. You're never going to have 100% of the information. You're never, and so you have to make decisions based on imperfect information and, a certain percentage. The checklist for me allows me to systematically go through and the big items, if there was something contaminated, well, then that may cause us to dive in a little deeper. Is that a $500,000 issue that we need to mitigate and remove the dirt and take it out there? So that may change the structure in which the deal terms that I currently have are. And is this, now that I'm aware of it, I interviewed someone recently. They were their friend was a programmer or developer with Amazon. And Jeff Bezos talks about this. He said what Amazon was looking for is two-way doors, not one-way doors. And so what that means is a one-way door are things that you go through is you can't go back. You close on that property, you can't unclose on that property if something goes wrong. And so you have kids, like, there's not going back. I don't like it. I have 3 kids. I love my kids. I'll have as many kids as my wife lets me, but it's also, you're on the other side of this. And so and the two-way door is you get an opportunity to go through it, check to see what's on the other side. If you don't like what's on the other side, you can just go back out to that. And so you're looking for an asymmetric risk profile. And I mentioned that earlier, taking calculated risk. So then you have to understand the brackets of what are the potential ramifications of this thing that I don't know about and that downside risk. When you're in escrow, and this is one of the things that's really unique to real estate, is you have a free option. You have tied up a piece of property, and what you're trying to do is eliminate all of those risks. And if you believe now I've eliminated or got a significant portion of the risk solved for, and I still like this deal, I can close on it. If I don't like, I find out that there's contaminated or the rents aren't what they are, or the appliances are not what they are baked out, and the OM is not accurate, I'm out. I walk away. And that's hard for a lot of people, and especially early and new investors to do, is to find out that wrong information. But it's much, much worse to close on the property and now you can't go back out. So you have to use those time periods when you have that two-way door and that opportunity, that asymmetric risk. Like, you want that deal to be like, I have 80% or 85% confidence that this is going to be a great deal. There's some variable of things of unknown, whack-a-mole, that you're going to have to deal with in the future, but it's enough to make the decision to go through. And you understand what that downside risk is. It going to bankrupt me? Is this deal I'm going to lose investors' money? Those are things that I would maybe shy away from. And so it becomes case by case to what you discover during that due diligence time period.
So I'm curious, with all that said, the whole hard money has become just a massive part of this environment at this point, right? So I think the most we were at was $1 million hard day one, and $1 million after, 30 days or something like that. How does that come into play for you?
That's why I'm not buying a lot of multifamily deals, because it is, I have a hard time getting over that. Why I love distressed assets, and when the market's declining, you're kind of calling the shots on the terms. And so when I look at it, I typically do not invest in the things that everyone else is investing into, because I cannot structure the deal that's beneficial to me. Not to say that I haven't done apartment deals. I tend to do very heavy value add. Like, we bought an office building, a 10-story office building that we're converting to apartments. To me, I had more time to structure the deal that was appropriate. Some of the things that we were able to discover was able to negotiate some of those pricing. But then if you're in a competitive environment, when you're like coming in hard, like, you have to have really, really good systems in place before you can feel comfortable to going hard on those types of money. And to me, it is an exercise of who's willing to take less money in the market, and especially in the multifamily space. And then you're making very significant and calculated risk that you're going to get that deal, and with certain certainty. And so I would say, I would be doing the work before I was in escrow, going into and, literally knocking doors, show up, do the things, doing everything. And that's what I say, doing the homework before you put it into contract. When you have that opportunity to make those decisions and you need to move quickly, when someone brings an opportunity and you're like, that's 25% under market value, I'll move quickly, I feel more comfortable coming in and putting money hard, because I have very intrinsic knowledge to that particular market or asset type or whatever. And so I can move quickly because I've done my homework ahead of time.
Jake Harris, the book is called Catching Knives, A Guide to Investing in Distressed Commercial Real Estate. Jake, how can people connect with you?
So the easiest way that I'm most active is catchknives.com, my website. I'm also Instagram, jake.realestate, on the website, Catching Knives. We have a newsletter. We have, the book link. We have courses. We have a lot of other things that information is available to people that are interested in learning more about what we're doing. And that's the most appropriate and fastest way to connect with us.
That's awesome. Jake, thanks very much for coming to the show today.
Hey, thank you, Michael. Garrett.